Good morning. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Christa Knight. I'm the Assistant Executive Director for Special Education Services here at the State Department. I do have Shawna Keene with me, and I think most of you all know Shawna Keene. She is one of our program specialists, does a lot around ed plan, behavior specialist. And then I just want to give a shout out, thank you to Gary Hurst for, he's our Director of Professional Development and Delivery Services, for always making these webinars so smooth for us. So good morning, and I'm glad you all could join us. I think most of you all know that we have done this Goals and Progress Monitoring training 11 times, I think, this past school year. It was very well attended. We were not able to accommodate everybody. Almost every session filled up quickly, and so what we wanted to do is have a webinar. And in saying that, the webinar is going to be a little different than the face-to-face. The presentation was developed for face-to-face presentation, and so I've had to just tweak a little bit of how we're going to present the information. I will say that this presentation will be recorded, and then we are doing another one this afternoon also. But the presentation will be recorded, so feel free to, if you're a director and you want to meet with your teachers at some time, there's some activity slides embedded into this presentation. I would love if you guys would take some time, even if this presentation may not last the whole hour and a half. This is our first one we've done as a webinar, so we'll kind of see if you have some time. If you have that time allotted and you have some time at the end of the webinar, if you have some staff, coworkers with you, take some time, do the activity slides. I will discuss them, but we won't embed a lot of time to actually do the activities in the webinar. I think it's important for us to discuss the purpose of this training before we even get started. This past year, now with Ed Plan, we are able in our role to, if a parent calls or if, as a teacher or director, if you call us, we are able to get on Ed Plan and really, look at the IEPs, the paperwork, whether we're discussing a situation with a parent or with a school. And so we're able to see a lot more, concerns in IEPs, where in the past, we really didn't look at the IEPs unless we were on site at a monitoring or something like that. So we are able to see a lot of concerns, and one of the things we are seeing is that goals aren't measurable, there's some concern that we needed to do some additional training around writing good, measurable IEP goals. And then in addition, we, of course, work with PCG, which is the company that we get Ed Plan out of. And they are Sean is going to introduce it today, later this morning in this webinar, but we are going to be introducing a new goals progress monitoring wizard in the system. You do not have to use it. It's an optional wizard, but it's going to make progress monitoring so much easier and I think more useful for IEP teams to look at and to really make decisions based on the students' needs and how well they're progressing toward the goals. But before we introduced that, we knew that we had some concerns with how well the IEP goals were written, how well they related to the students' actual needs. And so we wanted to do this training across the state to kind of just ask schools, districts, whether you're a director or a teacher, to really take a step back and evaluate your IEPs and see if you could really identify some areas that that you can improve on. Now, I do want to say that we're in this together. We're wanting to improve the quality of IEPs and not just focus on compliance. We're wanting to improve the quality of IEPs. So today, more than anything, I kind of want you to evaluate your practices, your procedures that you have in place at your district, at your site, and really look at what is that first step that we can do to improve how we are really developing our IEPs and making sure that our IEPs are really aligned with the students' needs and those goals are really targeting those needs, that we can monitor them so that we can make changes to the instruction or the interventions we're providing throughout the year in order not to waste any time. So that's kind of the reason we decided to have these trainings. They've been great opportunities for us to hear from the field too of concerns or how we can provide additional assistance. So again, these will be recorded. If you have questions, we do have, I think, around 200 that was supposed to be on this morning. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat box. We will try to address them as we go throughout the presentation. However, if we can't get to every one of them, you can always call and ask to speak with one of our program specialists. They'll be able to help you or discuss the question or issue with you. And then also we may take, if we have a lot of the same questions coming in, we're doing this presentation again this afternoon, if we have a lot of the same questions coming in, then we will probably do a little Q&A or something and send that out. So the presentation is uploaded. Shawna uploaded it on the Ed Plan State tab, so it's there for you. Feel free to use that if you're a director and you want to train or do this presentation for your staff. Please feel free to do that. One other thing, I've kind of mentioned this, but there are some activity slides embedded in this presentation. I left them in, and it's highly recommended that you take time for these reflection activities. Whether you do that after the presentation on your own, or if you do that as a group at some point through the recording of this webinar. But the whole purpose of this is for you to look at your, like I said, your practices, your procedures, and identify what are those first steps. Okay, we can't make all these improvements overnight, but we can start with step one. And that's what I really want you all to be thinking about today or this morning as we go through this presentation.
The one down, go down.
Oh, sorry, I'm trying to learn how to do the slides here. Thank you, Shawna. Okay, so first off, okay, this presentation is going to address several topics, and we're going to discuss some hard issues, some challenges, some barriers. But I want you to remember that we're all in this. One of the activities that we did face-to-face before we even went here is really taking some time to reflect on why we do what we do. What are those benefits of our jobs? And almost every, area that we did this, everybody had stories to share, just heartwarming stories of students and the impact they've had on their life. So it's important for us to remember that we do have a very important job. And we appreciate you all and what you're doing. It's hard work. We're part of your team, okay? But we also want to be looking at, how can we continuously evaluate the quality of services that our students in Oklahoma get, the students in our district, in our site. How can we evaluate that process and continue to improve on that? We should all want to grow, and we all should want to make improvements and provide better services than what we were providing, the day before or last year. So this conversation is not always easy. There's a lot of things that we're going to talk about this morning that are challenges, but of all the hard jobs around, one of the hardest is being a good teacher. We know that. And so we appreciate you. Again, I want you to understand we're in this together. Part of these face-to-face collaborations was so that we could walk away knowing what else we can provide at the state level to support schools and districts and special education teachers, general education teachers. So again, reflect on your practices, whether it's at the district or your site, whatever your job title is, what's working, what's not working, and if we can ask anything of you is that you leave here this morning with a step one. What am I going to do first? How am I going to, am I going to go back and really evaluate the IEPs that my staff are writing or that I am writing and really look at, what are those improvements that need to be made as step one. So let's talk about the agenda. I know that the presentation is around goals and progress monitoring, but again, one of the things that we've really realized over the last few years and really being able to look into IEPs more regularly and to get on when we're on the phone calls, with the parents or the schools and really looking in depth and hearing those questions, is that we have to make sure we are all on the same page with the purpose of the IEP. And I know that sounds really basic, but in just a few minutes, I'm going to talk about some of the things we're hearing and we're seeing, and I don't think there's a good understanding out there everywhere about the purpose of the IEP. Essential factors in creating effective IEPs, yeah, we can talk about goals and progress monitoring, but there's some essential factors that have to take place to create an effective, quality IEP. If we are overlooking those, then, a good goal, good progress monitoring is not going to be as useful and as beneficial to those students if we're not really looking at those essential factors that are in the law that are required when you're developing IEPs. Then we'll move into talking about goals, progress monitoring, and then Shawna will come up and introduce the goals progress monitoring wizard. This is going to take me just a minute until I get this down here. Okay, so let's talk about what the purpose of an IEP is not. So you all, when we had the face-to-face and we had a lot more collaboration going on, it was more of a discussion than just a presentation. And I saw a lot of heads nodding, a lot of giggles. You guys, we're really hearing these things. So the things that I have on this slide are actual comments that we've heard, probably more than once. This is not an exhaustive list. I mean, we've heard other concerns, but these are the ones that stand out to us. The purpose of an IEP is not to be in compliance. It's not the only purpose of the IEP is not compliance. Compliance is very important, and we know that, right? I mean, we would all agree compliance is very important. But the purpose of an IEP is to develop an individualized plan for these students who have qualified for special education services or are in need of special education services. So we've heard, my IEPs are great. I don't have any red stop signs. Well, that's great, okay? So if you're a director and you're monitoring the system and you're like, oh, my teachers are doing so great, we have no red stop signs, that's an important piece of that. But you also need to go in and you need to be looking at those IEPs. And I have talked to directors that have gone back after these face-to-face trainings that we did this past year, and they have said, you know what? I really did go back and I really did look at the IEPs, and we do need some additional training and support. And so you need to make sure that we're not just thinking, hey, there's no red stop signs, everything looks good in the system. And I want to point this out too, and Shawna will nod her head on this, I promise you. The Ed Plan system is the document that we've used that we've purchased that helps you develop the Ed Plan. The Ed Plan system is not intended to be what keeps you in compliance. I mean, it should help you, but the purpose of Ed Plan is not to write the IEP and to keep you in compliance. It's a tool, okay? You as the administrators, as the teachers, you are the ones responsible for making sure the IEP is written in compliance with IDEA and that, everything is not just, in order as far as compliance, but the IEP is well written and effective and really linked to that child's individualized needs. An IEP is not just paperwork completed annually and then not looked at again until next year. We hear this a lot, and I know there's a lot of you out there that's thinking, we would never say that, but we've heard this from both parents, and when we've called the districts, we've heard this from schools. Well, this mom, she brings this concern up all the time, but we've already, or maybe not the same concern, but this mom calls all the time, and, yes, we need to address this, but hey, we've already done their IEP for the year. So we'll discuss it next year. Well, we've identified these students as needing special education services to provide that free, appropriate public education. Well, we don't have a year to waste, right? And whether the concern is coming from a parent or a general education teacher, an administrator, the IEP purpose is an ongoing, process. It's not, you can't look at it as just paperwork, as I've got to complete it for the year and put it in the file cabinet or store it in Ed Plan, whatever it is. That's not the reason you complete paperwork. It is basically, you complete the IEP. The IEP is an educational plan that we're using for that child for that year. You have to understand the purpose of that and the importance of that for special education services, and we'll talk about that in a minute in a little bit more detail. An IEP is not just extra paperwork that must be completed for students who are receiving special education services. So again, we hear this, and you all will agree, we've heard this. Man, if I didn't have to spend so much time on completing IEPs, I could actually teach the students. Well, as a special education teacher, what are you going to be teaching those students? What are those specific skills that we're going to be targeting for that student who is in need of special education services if the IEP team hasn't gone through the IEP process to develop those? And so we're going to talk about that a little bit more on the next slide. But just remember that we all must make sure that we are on the same page as far as purpose of the purpose of the IEP. So I'm going to read the regs to you. The regs, of course, you all know that, are very important. As a special education teacher, I was in the classroom. I taught middle school prior to coming to the State Department. I knew the regs. I knew what was in our policies, procedures, but those regs, but I never really went in and studied the regs. And I've been at the State Department now for close to 14 years, and I've really had to learn the regs, really look into those, cite the regs on several different occasions, and it is important to know what the regs said. It helps you understand the purpose of why you do what you do and the purpose of why you have to document what you need to document. If you do not understand the regs or know the regs, I would highly recommend, as a special education teacher, that you go in and you really start looking at those and studying those. So IDEA says that the purpose of the IEP is to ensure that all children with disabilities have available to them a free, appropriate public education that emphasizes special education and related services, listen to this, designed to meet their unique needs and prepare them for future education, employment, and independent living. Okay, so let's just think about that for just a minute. Okay, when we determine a student is a child that needs special education services, we are saying that not only does this child meet one of the criteria or meet the criteria for one of the IDEA disability categories, but they also, because we know that a disability in itself doesn't qualify you for services, but they are also in the need. From the data that we're reviewing from the team, this evaluation group, eligibility group, has determined that this child is in need of special education services in order to receive that free, appropriate public education. So we've made that determination that it's required, it's needed for that FAPE, all right? So now what's required? What services are required? What services are needed to provide this FAPE? What are we going to address, as the reg says, that's going to emphasize the special education and related services designed to meet their unique needs? Well, that's the whole purpose of the IEP. The IEP team gets together and determines what are those services going to be, what are those goals. This is determined through the IEP process. So the importance of a well-written and implemented IEP, I don't think it can be overstated. My question to you would be, what is special education without it? I would argue, is the child truly getting a quality or getting those special education services if we haven't spent time as a team developing the IEP that's developed around that child's unique goals, right? Unique needs, and implementing it to meet the child's needs and reviewing it on a regular basis to make sure that we're progressing or that that we don't need to make changes to the instruction or the interventions that's being provided. So my argument would be, what is special education without it? Okay, so I know that's some basic stuff, but guys, the comments we're hearing, the questions we're getting, the stuff we're seeing on IEPs, we need to make sure, if you're a director out there, make sure you've done some good training to your staff around the purpose of the IEP, the importance of the IEP. Okay? Don't just make the assumption that all of your teachers are aware of that. Okay? Give them time to talk. Give them time to visit. Do this, this type of presentation for your administrators, for your general education teachers. Let them understand the importance of the IEP and their role in that. So that moves us into essential factors, okay? So hopefully we're all on the same page that the IEP is a very important document, for students that are receiving special education services. So some essential factors that we shouldn't overlook here, that we must also consider when we're developing effective IEPs. You must include team input and participation, okay? Special education teachers, and this goes to directors and administrators, to general education teachers. We're trying to do more on our end at the state level to make sure that administrators going all the way up to superintendents understand the importance that an IEP is developed by a team. And you all know that the team is required to be at least one regular education teacher at the meeting, but you should be getting input from all the students, regular education teachers, and an admin representative, special education teacher, a parent, the child when appropriate. So it is required under IDEA that the IEP is developed by that team. And when you think about that, a lot of our students receive their services in the general education classroom. The general education teacher should be a part of this process. Teachers, special education teachers are getting overwhelmed. They're not staying in the field. It's because all of this was never intended to be just on their back, right? The whole purpose, if you think about the purpose of the IEP, it is to develop this educational plan for these students. Well, students in special education, we all know they're receiving a level of service. It's not special education is not a location, it's a service. All students are general education students. So when we're developing this plan, it needs to really be developed by general ed, special ed, your admin, the parents, the students. It should really be team input. And making sure that you have all required signatures is not the same as team input, okay? Remember, the purpose of the IEP is not merely compliance. So we still hear this, we still see this in files. Will we run this over to get so-and-so to sign? Parents are becoming more and more knowledgeable about IDEA. They understand. The signature says, they were in attendance. They're at the meeting. That's what the signature means. So, we need to make sure that we have input. Those required team members are there, a part of that IEP process, but that we also have input from, the general education teachers and other educators or specialists that would be beneficial to the child's educational process, that we're really looking at that and making sure everybody that we need is around the table when we are developing and making these plans for our students. Okay, you guys are going to hear me say this several times through this presentation. You have to include current present levels of academic achievement and functional performance data. Okay, you're developing an educational plan for a child for the year. Okay, for that school year, that IEP year. Okay, you're developing a plan for them. You have to know where that child is at now so that you understand what goals need to be developed. What do we expect to be able to see by the end of the school year? Okay, how are we going to make sure that he or she is progressing toward those goals? You have to have a current starting point. That just makes sense, and we're going to talk about that several times in this presentation. Do not develop an IEP unless you have current present levels. There's lots of different ways that you get that. Current levels, classrooms, scores, the classroom tests that you do, your benchmarks, any kind of classroom assessments. You just have to have information of where we're starting, and you want it to be really linked to this child's needs, those things that we're really wanting to build up and address. You have to include high expectations, okay? I know this sounds like, as teachers, of course we have high expectations, but guys, we as educators and as parents or whoever this team was that sat around and said, yes, this child qualifies for special education, we made that determination. But that only means that the child needs another level of services and supports. It does not limit, because the child qualifies for special education services, it does not limit their potential as far as being able to achieve and have those high expectations to go to college or whatever it means. And a lot of times it's almost just like, the child's in special education, you almost automatically lower expectations for that student. The IEP team's the one that should be addressing those child's specific needs, but we should have high expectations for those teams. And you should have no policy in your district that includes lower expectations for students on IEP. We still see that. If you're on an IEP, you automatically don't have to get over a 70% in a class, or you can't make more. We even heard through these regional trainings that we did, we had districts that were still saying, well, if you're on an IEP, you can't make over a 70% in a general education classroom. Guys, that's wrong. You'll get a complaint filed against your district, and you will be found in noncompliance. You can't lower expectations for a student just because they're on an IEP, okay? You, as the team, make decisions based on what this child can do, looking at the present levels of data, and you set high expectations for that student, and you provide the supports and services that are needed. It's not our disabilities, it's our abilities that count. We need to focus on our abilities and build on those, and then try to address those specific needs that we've identified through the IEP process that we're going to work on. So we have to make sure we're using a team. When we're developing these IEPs, we're using current, present levels of performance, and we have high expectations for all students. So this is the first reflection activity. And again, we can't do this the same way since this is a webinar. But I want you to think about these things. These are the things that gave the important takeaways from the regional trainings. These were the things that started the really interesting and in-depth conversations that ended up turning into, you know, other districts getting up and sharing, well, this is how we do this, and this is how that, you know, so do this at your site, okay? If you're a director, take some time with your staff and have these conversations. If you're a teacher, reflect on these and figure out what are those things that we do really well here around developing IEPs with team participation and high expectations. What are our strengths with that? But then also think about what are those important factors that, you know, those things that hinder us being able to really get team participation or high expectations, and think about what would it take to, you know, what would be step one in trying to improve this, okay? What would be that first step? Again, we can't make all these changes overnight, and we're not expecting you to, but I do want to mention this, and a lot of you guys have been in the field for a while will know this, but you know, when I first came to the State Department, when we went out and monitored, we were really just looking at compliance. That's what we focused on. We focused on compliance. Did you have an IEP in place? Did you have something in all the required spaces of the blanks on the IEP? You know, we do some interviews to make sure you were having team meetings and things like that. But we, at the federal level, in all states, are required to move away from just focus to compliance to more results-based accountability for students with IEPs. So we are having to move our monitoring system that direction. And again, this is not just Oklahoma. This is across the board. All states are having to do this. We've been doing this for several years now. The Andrew F. case, if you guys are not familiar with that, look that up. And it's really just another example of that. We're not just making sure that students on IEP, or students receiving special education services, have an IEP in place. They're really looking at, are we really truly providing an IEP that is designed to meet the child's specific needs, okay? So it's important for you to take some time and look at your IEPs, look at these processes, and figure out, hey, you know, this is just how we've always done it here, but now we may need to be looking at what are those things that we can do to improve this process. That's all I'm asking is, as a state, I want us to start moving forward together. We're all in this together. I want to start moving forward. We can't do it overnight, but we can start making those first steps. We're making those at our state level. This training was one of the first steps for us. What are you going to do at your site to try to improve the services for students in receiving special education services? Okay, so think about that activity. Take some time. Try to do that at a later time. But now, if we're all in agreement of the purpose of an IEP, and we all agree that there's essential factors that we can't overlook, we're going to start talking about goals, okay? So let's start, like I said, how important the regs are. Let's look at the regulations. So again, importance of a reg, okay? Definition of an IEP program, and this is part of it. that I pulled out that talks specifically about goals. A statement of measurable annual goals. IEP must include a statement of measurable annual goals, including academic and functional goals designed to, here we go, this is what your goals are meant to do, meet the child's needs that result from the child's disability, to enable the child to be involved in and make progress in the general education curriculum, and meet each of the child's other educational needs that result from the child's disabilities. You guys, in the regs, that needs that result from the child's disability is not bolded and underlined. I did that to stress that that's what the goals are designed to do. Okay, that is very important for us to remember. If we have goals and we can't even, they don't even relate to what we've identified as the child's needs, again, what is the purpose of the IEP? All right, so this is where we kind of had some tough conversations face-to-face with the group, because there's a couple things here I want to mention when we're talking about goals before we start talking about, the development of a goal. And again, this is not specific to Oklahoma. These things do not have to change overnight, but we do need to start looking at those and moving in a different direction. A lot of our students are students that receive the most of their education in the educational setting. We all know that. Most of our students in special education are categorized as specific learning disabilities. Most of those students are in a general education classroom most of their educational day, most of their day. So we see a lot of goals that Johnny will pass math with 70% accuracy or better, okay? We want all students to pass with 70% or accuracy. That's the goal for all students. Again, think about this. We've gone back at some point and made a decision that this child is a child that needs a different level of services. They need special education services to provide that FAPE. So we need to really be addressing those specific needs. When we're talking about a student that is in general education classes, we still have to figure out how are we going to address those specific needs. That's why it's important for the admin to be a part of this, the general education teacher to be a part of this, because they have a role in this, okay? But those are we need to move away from those goals, because those are goals for general education students also. Those are not specific to that child's needs. Also, we have right now in Ed Plan, we have the drop box that provides you the state standards. Well, it's very important that we are, again, those high expectations. We want to make sure that our goals, that you want them to align with those expectations you have for their same age peers with standards. And you want to teach toward the standards. But a standard in itself, a lot of times, if you don't tweak that or narrow it in or make some objectives to say, hey, this is how we're working toward that, if you really look at a lot of the state standards, they are truly broad standards, right? So, yes, you can use state standards. We're not saying that you can't at this point, but we are having conversations now, saying, that some of the conversations that came up through these presentations is, well, we were told we had to use state standards. Well, I'm telling you today, you do not have to use state standards. There's always been an option for you to tweak those state standards, to add your own goals. The standards were put in there so that we would make sure that we were trying to teach and our students toward the state standards and to align them with the state standards. So you need to really be looking at, when you're developing goals, how can we really address those specific needs that result from the child's disability? If you can't answer that, my thought would be, okay, well, we need to actually figure out, do we have present levels of performance? Do we know specifically what the child's needs are? Because if you do, you're going to be able to write some good measurable goals around that. So let's move into what is a goal. Okay, so as we did this goal presentation, and again, we had directors, related service providers, special education teachers. We had a lot, which gave a great, started a great conversation. They were really able to provide some clarity on some stuff and provide some great talking points were the general education teachers that became special education teachers. So, what I found out from this group is that everybody knows how to write a well-written, measurable goal. It's just, are we doing it? And that's what I want you to reflect on today. Yes, you know, if you don't know how to, I'm going to go through some steps that's going to help you improve that process. There's a lot of stuff out there on the internet about how to write well-written goals. But my question to you today, again, this is kind of our step one, is look at your IEPs and see if you are writing well-written goals, okay? If you're writing, if your goal is measurable and it really addresses the child's specific needs. So a goal is a written, measurable statement that describes what a student is reasonably expected to accomplish within the time period covered by that IEP. We've already kind of talked about that. And then is designed to address the specific needs that result from the child's disability. Those are the two basic things that your goal needs to be able to do. Reasonably accomplish during the time period of the IEP and designed to address the specific needs. How do we know the specific needs? From the present levels of performance. Okay, goals must directly relate to the areas of needs identified in the present levels, must be clear descriptions, okay, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, but clear descriptions of the skills the student needs to address, participate, or make progress in the general education curriculum. Focus on addressing the needs described in the present levels of performance, right? We've talked about that several times already. Must be measurable to guide the monitoring of progress toward achieving the goal, okay? You have to, and we're going to talk about this in more detail, but as you develop a goal, you have to figure out, how are we going to measure this? How are we going to know if the child is achieving the goal? It's not about waiting till the end of the year to say, can he or she do this now? It's about looking at it throughout the year to determine, hey, is the instruction we're providing, are the interventions working, or do we need to look at doing some additional instruction or different, you know, supports or services for this child to meet the goals. So here's something I want you to kind of take a few minutes and think about, okay? When you are identifying goals or when you are developing goals for your students that are receiving special education services, you should be actually doing a process of developing a goal, right? It's not just about, hey, this goal sounds good or this might work, right? There's a process, and again, we've already talked about that a little bit, but it's looking at your present levels of performance and developing a goal. Okay, you must have a plan that goes along with each of these goals, and we'll talk about that when we talk about progress monitoring. But a goal without a plan is just a wish. So my question to you, are you developing goals or are you making wishes? Okay, so think about that for just a minute. Are we really putting a process in place when we are developing the goals, or are we just kind of selecting stuff that says, hey, this sounds good, and making wishes for that child? So when you're ready to, you're setting down to develop IEP goals, can you answer these questions? What does the student need to learn or do academically? Okay, what are those critical things right now that the student needs to be able to do? What does the student need to learn or do functionally, right? We want to look at academics and functional behaviors, and functional. And again, we're looking at academics, and I don't talk a lot about this in this presentation, but you're also looking at skills. There may be behavior things that we need to address. So what is reasonable for this student to achieve in a year? Okay, we have to kind of know a lot about this child that we're developing this IEP for. If you can't answer these questions, well, right now you're not ready to develop goals. We need to get some more data, and we need to figure out what are these child's needs, where do we need to go, what is the child able to achieve in a year, and then when you get those answers, then you can move on to developing. Again, developing because it's a process, the goals for your students. And when you're talking about well-written goals, and I think you all probably know this, but again, there's a difference between knowing something and doing something. So, a well-written goal should answer the following questions. Who does what, when, given what conditions, how much, and then what we're going to talk about a little bit later is how will it be measured. Okay? That's a very important process. When you're developing a goal, those are the things that we should be thinking about, okay? If you develop a well-written goal, it should answer all those questions. Now, on your IEP form, there's places for you to put those type of things. How it will be measured may not be directly on the IEP, but you're going to put what tools and stuff that you use, but your whole progress monitoring plan may be more of just something that we're developing as part of the process. So if your goal addresses all these questions, great, okay? Now it's time to develop your SMART goal. And I think you all have probably heard about SMART goals. You want to look at your goals. Are they specific? And again, we're saying, hey, are they specific? Is it very clear? And I'm going to go through each of these a little bit. Measurable. Can we measure it? Can we tell if the child is progressing or not? Attainable, relevant, and timely, time limited, okay? Your goals, and again, I want you to, if you haven't looked into the Andrew F. case, one of the things where this child had the same goal year after year after year, and there was nothing that showed, really the child progressing toward or anything that's changed. So we have to make sure that we're really looking at these yearly, annually, throughout the year to make sure that, how's the child progressing. Again, this is a plan for the educational services for that year for this child, those special education services. So we need to be looking at it regularly. Okay, so let's talk about specific. Goals must be well-defined and specific to identified skills or targeted areas, okay? We have to figure out, if Shawna is in District B, I'm in District A, and one of my students moved to her district, they should be able to read the goal and say exactly, oh, this is what the child is supposed to be accomplishing, and this is what actions will take place. It needs to be very, very specific to what we expect for this child, well-defined and specific to those specific skills that we've identified. It needs to be measurable. Okay, again, this is going through the SMART. So here's your M, measurable. Goals must be measurable so that you have evidence that you have accomplished the goal. Okay? If you do not have a plan of how you're going to measure this and how often you're going to measure this, then you're going to be we're wasting time. We need to really be on top of the child's goals. That's what we're providing for them. These are the areas that we've said, hey, they truly need addressed. There should be an identified source to measure the progress toward the goal. We should, and what you put there should make sense, okay? So like if you're going to say that you're going, the child is going to get 6 out of 7 trials of something, and then we say how are we going to measure it grades, that doesn't really align, right? It could be a percentage or something like that. So it needs to be very clear of how we're going to measure the progress. Sometimes measurement can be difficult, okay? The team will need to work together sometimes to determine what's the best way that we can do this, what's feasible, what's going to be the easiest way for us to do this, but that we will be able to truly monitor the progress of this goal for this child. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more when we talk about measuring progress. Obtainable, and you guys know this, so I don't spend a lot of time on these slides, but the goals must be attainable. So you want it to challenge the student. Again, I've talked about the importance of high expectations, but of course you don't want them impossible for the child to achieve that school year. And sometimes they may need additional support or, supplementary aids or something like that to get to the goal. But, what does the student have the tools, the skills needed to obtain this goal? And if not, what additional supports or tools are needed, okay? And so, and listen, I'm gonna read this comment I just now got. It says, I like to progress monitor every Monday in reading and math, but some weeks I don't get to it, and I'm out of compliance if I write a goal that progress monitoring will be measured weekly. So this is going to be beneficial to, I think, these comments that are going to start coming up probably, and feel free to share those, guys. You all are going to learn more from each other than you're ever going to learn from listening to a PowerPoint. So if you want to start putting in the chat box, so this is what we do, or this is how we struggle, or this is what we, have challenges with, and then if you want to reply to those, hey, this is what we do, but I will, So start throwing these things out. We'll address them as we can as we go through this. But then share your thoughts. What works for you? What challenges are you having? And although we're not face-to-face, you can still kind of have that conversation in the chat box. But it says, am I out of compliance if I write a goal that progress monitoring will be measured weekly? Okay, so no. Here's the thing on that. You as a team determine, you know, by looking at the goal and what tool you're using is how often you need to measure it, right? So you would just need to be measuring it regularly because the team, you know, if you say you're going to measure it weekly, then look at it weekly. If you're going to do it monthly, look at it monthly. That's determined by the team. We're not going to come in and say, oh, that doesn't look right. You should be progress monitoring more. We're just going to make sure that you're doing it and that you're making decisions based on that. So, well-written goals, okay, may challenge a student, but they are not impossible to achieve. That's what we need to remember. We need to make sure that the goals are attainable that school year with the supports and services. And again, we may need to address what tools and supports are needed for that student to reach those goals. Relevant goals must be realistic, okay, relevant goals that address the student's unique needs that result from the disability. So, is the result of the goal important for the educational success of the student? Well, it should be, or we shouldn't have it as a goal, right? That's the thing we're wanting to make sure. We've identified these specific areas that this child needs addressed. We need to be making sure our goals are addressing those areas. Is the goal aligned with the student's present levels of academic achievement and functional performance? Again, when we see IEP goals, we should be able to go back and see those where the child is at now in those areas, and make sure, if you've listed it as an educational academic need, that we see how you are addressing that through the IEP. Okay. Timely, time limited. I've talked about this a little bit already, but what does the child need to know and be able to do in the time frame of the IEP? So again, what's the starting point for each of the child's needs? So the starting point is the present levels of academics and functional performance, and we want to write the IEP is what we think the child can do in that year. Time-limited goals enable you to monitor progress at regular intervals, okay? It's very important that we have a goal for that time, what we expect to see at the end of this, you know, whether, you know, we have the goal going through, you know, half the year or the whole year, but when we're expecting to see the progress, we need to be able to monitor that to make sure we're making accurate progress toward that goal. So I'm going to leave this up just for a second. Again, we can't do it in a webinar. We can't do exactly like we wanted to in the past. And I'm probably going to need to be moving a little bit quicker through this, but Sally will be able to solve addition word problems. So, you know, if you're thinking about a SMART goal, what are those additional things that we would need to make sure that we have in that? And so we have developed just an example that we pulled from somewhere to put in the presentation, but I will tell you that I gave participants time. So if you go through this with your staff, with the other teachers, or, you know, and kind of work on this on your own, take some time and let them reword this to make it SMART. And I promise you, their goals were a lot better than what I have embedded in this presentation. But ours was, when given 5 addition word problems, Sally will identify keywords, set the problem up, and solve for the answer with 80% accuracy by March 1st, 2019. So, but, you know, this is just practice in making sure that we're addressing everything we need to address through a goal. Some of the feedback we got on this was, well, you know, I would say when read orally, that Sally will be able to, you know, when read 5 addition problems, because if we don't say that, you know, that was a good point. If we don't say that it's read orally, she may have trouble reading, and that may be what's hindering her. So you need to be as clear as you can on those type of things. And then we had, we had another one. Sally will identify the letters in the alphabet and identify what sound each letter makes. So again, taking just a few seconds, looking at that, and really just identifying what's missing from that. How would we make that SMART? When shown uppercase letters, Sally will orally state the names of all 26 letters and the corresponding sounds. And the letters and the corresponding sounds the letters make with 100% accuracy. Some of the feedback we got on this, well, we'd make this two separate goals. Sally would orally state the names of all letters. 26 letters would be one goal, and then identify the corresponding sounds would be another. So that's great. So just making sure, just make sure your teachers, or if you need additional training on making sure that goals are really SMART goals, take some time and provide that to your staff, or take some time and look into that personally. And so I think some of the questions, and I apologize, Shawna's kind of helping me a little bit with this, but is around like what's the best way to progress monitor. And I'm going to move into progress monitoring here shortly. But let me just read over a few of these. We typically measure goals every 9 weeks.
Yeah,
so those would be team decisions, right? So when you develop your goals, okay, and there's not anything that I would say is typically or anything like that, when you develop the goals, the team would decide how often do we need to progress monitor. And then as you're progress monitoring, you might need to say, hey, we need to change or edit that. And we are, just so you all know, because I think progress monitoring has been one of the hot topics that's came up lately. This presentation, although we're going to talk about progress monitoring, it's going to be more of, are we doing it? I mean, are we even monitoring the progress of our students toward their annual goals? And then we have decided from this that schools are wanting some additional training just around how do you progress monitor. So we will work on that, providing some additional guidance and some trainings around progress monitoring. But just to be able to get through, it's already almost 8:30, to be able to get through this presentation and to still hit on what I'm wanting to hit on for this presentation, I'm going to keep moving, but just know that we are going to provide, that was kind of our feedback from the field as we went regionally, is that they want more in depth of, okay, so no, we're not doing it, how do we do it, give us some more guidance, and we will do that. But this training today is not, we can really, if that makes sense, we can really caught into, well, how does this work for this go or this go, and then we won't get through our presentation. So I'm going to continue, and then just knowing that we are going to provide additional training and guidance around progress monitoring. But to hit the big question is that we're not going to tell you how often to progress monitor. I do want to hit that. That would be something that your team would decide based on that goal, and you should get support from your administrators, your district, of kind of how you do that at your district and what they would expect to see.
And tell them to keep asking questions.
Yes.
Gary will give us some
yes.
And we can
keep asking the questions, though. Okay, keep asking the questions, even if it's in depth in progress monitoring, because we are going to, those will be important for us to know what we need to address through Q&As and trainings and things like that. So keep the questions and the conversations coming. And if you have a, if someone posts something that they think, hey, how do you do this out there, whatever, you guys can communicate through that chat box also. So yes, keep the questions coming. I just want to, we have to be finished by 9, so I want to make sure that we don't miss any of the content in the presentation. So, prioritizing goals. This is a big topic too, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these slides because I need to give time to Shawna also to talk about to introduce the goals progress monitoring wizard. But we do get a lot of calls about, hey, or we'll see IEPs that have tons of goals. Well, if you remember the purpose and what we're trying to do, you're not going to want 30 or 40 goals. That's going to be very hard to monitor monitor progress. Now, you can always, if the child's doing very well in their goals, you can and they've achieved the goals, you can always add more. But we do have students that need a lot of educational support, and there's a lot of needs that we need to address. So what you need to do as a team is really look at what are those functional skills that we need right now that we really need to address. A lot of times that's reading, looking at those things that are critical for this child. We want to start there, okay? What's preventing this child from participating in a least restricted environment? You know, what are those things that we need to address first? Now, I will say I've had calls that people have called and said, well, then, you know, how many goals are we supposed to have? Well, that's a team decision too. We're not ever going to come in and cite you for having too many goals or anything like that. It's just that you need to make sure that it's really that you are working toward those goals and that you are monitoring progress. Because why write it on a paper if we're not doing anything toward it? Okay, we might all know the child needs that, but we may, you know, save some of those for the next IEP. You got to really prioritize goals. Okay, so let me move. Here's the reflection activity. We're not going to have time to do that, but just thinking about what's hindering you from making SMART goals. You may be doing great, so what are some of those things that you do really well that helps you develop that? Okay, think about this. Without continual growth and progress, such words as improvement, achievement, and success have no meaning. All right? So this is our introduction to progress monitoring. We have to know if we're seeing growth and progress, okay, so that we know if there's improvement, achievement, and success. And we all want improvement, achievement, and success for our students, correct? So we have to be able to measure growth and progress. So let's move into progress monitoring. Okay, again, we're talking about the regs, right? The importance of the regs. We have to, and you all know this, we have to know how the child's progress toward meeting the annual goals described in the paragraphs is going to be measured. How are you measuring it? It's a part of the process. We have to give progress reports, okay? So we have to, and that's the goals progress monitoring wizard that's going to help you give those progress reports and help have those conversations with the team. It's going to give you a great way to do that. But we have to, it's required, know how are we measuring progress toward those goals. So challenges of progress monitoring, it requires measurable present levels and goals. So your present levels, right, is the starting point. And your goals should be, and I'm going to kind of give you a way to a simple way to kind of think about this in just a second. But your goal should be, here's where we're starting, here's where we want to be at the end of the year, right? So, or at the end of the IEP timeline. So it needs to be measurable. Requires IEP team to collaborate, including upfront planning. Guys, when you're developing goals, it shouldn't just be, hey, like we said, making wishes. It's a process. You're developing goals. That should be done by an IEP team. May require the team to develop new, different documentation habits. Hey, if we don't have a good way of tracking, a lot of the times what we need, especially if it's behavior or skills or things like that, is some kind of documentation we've created to track things. So, you know, it can feel like a lot more work initially, but I promise you, in the end, you know, this, you get to see the growth, and it's easier. I don't want to make it harder than what it is. And like I said, we will do some additional trainings around this. My question to you for this training was, are we even looking at this? Are we monitoring progress like we should be? Okay? And feedback from the field is, and I'm not saying this is everybody, just from our regional trainings, is no, but we need help figuring out what we need to do and how we can, what tools to use. And so that's what we're trying to do on our end, is kind of build those type of resources and that type of thing to provide additional assistance. Characteristics of effective progress monitoring, well, it needs to measure behavior skill outlined in the goal, correct? It should be regular and frequent. Again, we're not going to tell you it should be this for that. We don't, that's your district, that's your IEP team decision, but you should be monitoring progress. It should be easy to implement, take only a short amount of time from instruction, or it can be embedded into the instruction or within the instruction, and it's sensitive to change over time, because you want to make sure that you can measure goals. You know, you want to measure even the smallest changes in goals. So how to progress monitor goals. Well, describe how progress toward the annual goals will be measured. So when you're developing goals, you also have to think about what performance data will be collected. What are we going to have to know if this child is progressing toward the goal? What tools or methods do we have available to use? How often? Where? By whom? These are the things, again, that we won't be telling you, hey, you have to, do this or that. We will give you guidance. We have, I also am the director for our State Personnel Development Grant, which is our OTIS, our Oklahoma Tiered Intervention System of Support. We have an OTIS implementation guide that talks a lot about progress monitoring in depth. And so, these type of things are determined by, your school, your team. We're not going to come in and tell you that. What we want to know is, are you progress monitoring your goals? Okay? But there's guidance out there, and we'll give you guidance. Now, I want to kind of bring this all together in this slide, because when you're developing goals, you should also be, now again, this isn't something that you have to have a document in, but a document for, but you should be developing a progress monitoring plan for those goals, okay? You should have a thought process in mind of, okay, so we identify and we operationally define academic behavior or functional knowledge, skills, and abilities to be measured. So we know what we're looking at. We know we've written some well-defined, well-written SMART goals. We know exactly what we're focusing on. We've determined who, where, and how often the data will be collected. How are we going to measure? How are we going to make sure this child is progressing toward the goal? And we've not only conducted, but we've identified and conducted the progress monitoring tool. Okay, and we want to collect several data points across times and settings to figure out, hey, now we're reviewing this data, we're seeing some progress, or no, we're not, so we need to go back and look at the instruction, or we need to figure out what's working, and that's evaluate the effectiveness of our specially designed instruction. Our specially designed instruction is kind of what we've developed through that IEP process. It's the services that we've decided are needed, the goals, okay, and we make changes as necessary if they're not effectively progressing toward their goals, okay? And we score and summarize the data in ways that parent or team members will understand. And I wanted to throw that in there because that's the tool that Shawna is going to introduce to you that will be available in EdPlan if you want to use that. But let me kind of bring this all together because I think this is going to help you. I don't want you guys to make this harder than what it is. Let's think about this. When you go on a diet, okay, we've all probably been there. Seems like I'm trying to be on one all the time. But when you go on a diet, you don't just say, hey, I want to lose 20 pounds by next year, or I want to lose 15 pounds by the beginning of the summer, right? You don't just say that and say, well, let's see how that works out, right? Because then I'm making a wish. But when you go on a diet, you say, okay, I'm going to write me out, even if I wrote out a goal, I'm by eating better and making healthier choices, okay, I am going to lose 10 pounds by the end of June or whatever it may be, right? So I kind of know exactly what I want to do. I've made myself a goal, but how I'm going to get there, it could be different depending on how Shawna might try to lose 10 pounds and how I might try to lose 10. It's totally different, but we know each other. Shawna knows herself, people that know Shawna would know better of what would work for her. People that know me would know better what works for me. It may be that I need to stop eating all the sugar, okay, and that's really what it is, okay? I need to put the chocolate down. I need to put the desserts down, and, but for Shawna it may be, well, I eat pretty healthy, but I need to exercise, right? So there's different ways that we can achieve that goal, and that's what you're doing when you're developing the progress monitoring plan is you're deciding, hey, how are we going to get there? What are we going to do for that child? So if I'm going on a diet, I first have to know what? I have to know my present levels of performance. I have to go get on the scale and I have to weigh, okay? I have to know that because I cannot know if I reached my goal at the end of the time frame unless I have that present level, right? So I get my present level, I develop my plan of what's going to be working, and then I have a goal of when I want to lose my 10 pounds. Now, your progress monitoring plan would be, what would be your tool? Your tool would be your scale, because that's how you're going to weigh. You're going to weigh in. And I'm not going to weigh every day because I'm not going to see enough growth there. So, and it's going to be very discouraging. So I'm going to weigh once a week. That's what I'm going to decide. Now, if I weigh today and I go in and weigh again next Thursday and I weigh 4 pounds more than what I weighed this week, and what am I going to do? I'm going to adjust what I've been doing, right? And that is the same process. So don't make it harder than what it is, but do we have a plan like that in place for every goal? And we should have. I mean, Our kids, you know, that's valuable time that we're spending with those kids, and we don't want to lose any time. Those students they're the ones in our school that we've identified need a level of support that, you know, qualifies them for special education services. We really need to make sure that we're spending the time identifying what are those present levels, where do we want them, and how are we going to get them there. So it's the same thing when you're on a diet. You know, if you weigh in and not looking good, well, then you're going to change up what you're doing. If you weigh in and you've lost 5 pounds, you're going to, it's working, let's keep doing it, okay? That's progress monitoring a diet, okay? It's that simple. If medicine, same thing. If you go to the doctor and your blood pressure is sky high, and he says, hey, I'm going to start you on these 2 pills, take 2 a day, he's not going to say, come back next year and we'll see if that worked, right? He's going to say, okay, come back in a couple of weeks, we'll look at it and we'll monitor it and we'll adjust as we needed. He's progress monitoring, okay? So we need to remember that when we're developing goals, that we have a plan in place of progress monitoring. This presentation, the purpose of this presentation, again, was to get you thinking of those first steps. So go back, look at your IEPs, think about these. Do we have present levels of performance? That would be my first thing to ask you. And I have had people say, hey, no, we don't. Or we have it, but it's not on our IEP. Well, then what are you considering when you're developing that IEP? You know, what are you looking at? You need to have present levels of performance on the IEP. We need to have goals that tie specifically to the child's needs. And then we need to make sure that we have a plan of how we're going to get the child to meet the goal, and progress monitor so that we can make changes to the specially designed instruction as we need to through the process. Okay, my question to you, are we doing this? Okay, and then these, I'm going to just skip through these. This is just kind of a chart to show that we use our data-rich present levels, we develop measurable goals, and then we're providing those services, those supports that are part of that IEP process, and we're progress monitoring, and we're making changes as we need to, okay? When you're developing IEP goals, you have to spend time in each of these areas. It's not just about selecting a goal and making a wish, right? You've got to be looking at your present levels of performance to develop those goals, and then you've got to progress monitor. That should be all part of the IEP goal process. Okay, so again, this was just an activity where you get in teams 3 or 4, talk about a goal, develop a measurable goal, and just talk about, just like I did through the dieting plan or the with medication, of what would that look like to really monitor that goal, to make sure that we're staying on top and monitoring progress toward student goals. So how progress should be displayed and interpreted, I put this slide in just to kind of introduce you to the information that Shawna is going to share, but comparing expected and actual rates of progress. I don't know if you all are like me, but I love the graphic displays, and that's what EdPlan is offering us. Again, she's going to tell you this, but it's an optional tool for you to use. But, you know, I like a clear visual representation of progress over time, something that you can really share with the parents, helps that communication. You know, your students are going to be able to keep track of their own progress by looking at this, and it can be a motivational tool, okay? So I'm going to have Shawna come up and introduce this tool. Again, she's just going to kind of introduce this, and I think they're doing some training on this, so you might mention that. And then I will come back up and close those out this morning.
Okay.
And
Okay. Good morning, guys. Okay, just like Christa had said, nothing's going to change in EdPlan. Don't panic. This is just a new tool that will be added, and it's actually added in the wizards. And you can see it on the IEP goal page. So it's nothing new you have to do. It's nothing complicated. It's just a wizard that will help you with your progress monitoring. And these are some things, that we'll just go over quickly. And like Christa said, we're going to be doing watch your emails. I think Bobette and I in May may be doing one in Oklahoma City and one in Sapulpa, just to kind of get you a brief overview. This is what our goal page looks like now. And this is how we're going to revise it. See, nothing has changed. It's just going to look, the goal page may look a little different than what it does now. I've played with it on staging. It doesn't, change it. This is exactly what you guys have been doing. To revise it, you really are going to have to pick what your progress monitoring tools are going to be. There's going to be a list to choose from. I know you guys do district benchmarks, so you might get with your districts and decide, do you do the STAR reading, STAR math, measured progress, or whatever you guys use for that. And so then your teachers will choose what they're going to use to measure the progress of the goal. Same thing here, revised goal page. You do the subject, and you're going to do the score type. So really have those conversations with your teachers about score types and making sure your goals are measurable. I know there's been a lot of questions on the board about percentage, tally mark. That's where you guys are going to have to sit down as a team and decide what's best to measure that goal. Okay, then you will choose, if you do percentage, what's your target score? Most everybody puts 70. Well, what does that mean? So you're going to have to really look at the goal. So you mean 70% of the time he has to score 70, so be talking about that. You don't have to put the target date. You can if you want. Maybe if it is an ESY goal, it may have a different target date. If not, it will be the end of the IEP. Associating your goals to service. You really want to make sure we get this question a lot, especially design instruction versus the goal. And like Christa said, they all should be moving together. So when you're doing your progress monitoring, it will be easier. A lot of times, I know teachers, you wait, oh, I got to do a progress monitoring. Okay, so let me just go in and do it. You should be all doing it all throughout the year. And this is what you're going to associate the goals to service. This just helps the speech teacher. These are the goals when you're doing your progress monitoring in the wizard. When you're logging your progress monitoring, and this is something you can do after you finalize the IEP. And like I said, don't get worried about this. We will have lots more training on this. But once you finalize that IEP, you can start progress monitoring immediately. Now, I'm not saying you have to send a progress note home. I'm just saying as you do your benchmarks, as you do your teacher test, you can go in and be logging this progress throughout the school year. So when you get ready to do your progress notes, it's already there for you. And when you're logging your progress monitoring, this is what it looks like. You'll go to the wizard, and then you will click on your goal, expand everything, and it will open up. Then you're going to put in the date. So today he got, a 25, and you may want to make comments. Johnny's been absent. Maybe he was sleepy that day. Maybe he forgot his medication. And then as your progress monitoring throughout the school year, you're going to go log the progress. Then when it's time for the progress notes, you don't have to think back, okay, in November he was tired, so he scored a 5. I don't really remember why. You're doing this throughout the life of the IEP. And then, like Christa said, to me, this is fabulous. It really helps explain to parents about goals and about your progress, because a lot of times we tell parents, oh, he's made, he's jumped 5 points. Well, to me, that's kind of abstract for parents. When you're actually looking at this line, you as a teacher can see, okay, you know what? I see that Johnny is making progress, or no, I see he's going down. His lines are starting to go down. So you really as a team can look at that and a parent and talk about it. Now, I know a lot of people get worried about, okay, well, what about every time I print the goals and paper? You can choose to include this graph or not. Maybe you don't want to include it on every progress note. Maybe you want to just do it on the end progress note. That's totally up to you guys as a team, or when you're printing your progress note, if you choose to print the goal or not. And this is what it looks like. And see, you have the progress line, the target line, and the trend line. These are very important for parents, and like Christa has said, with the Andrew F. case, and our parent phone calls are, off the charts right now at the State Department. And I think it's all because parents aren't quite understanding. So this, to me, if I gave this to the parent, this is where your child should be, this is where we want him to be, this is the progress we're making, and you can show that parent, hey, your son is making progress. We're making slow progress, but progress is progress. But also as a teacher, you can tell your gen ed teacher, hey, Johnny's going the wrong way. Okay, we need to assemble the team. Let's talk about what more supports can be put in place. What do we need to do to help support this baby? So to me, I love these charts, like Christa said. And then when you're getting ready to do your progress report, you would do it the same as you would every year. However many times you guys are doing it. You go push progress report just like you would do, and then you have included the graph in there, and then you will do your progress report just like you would any other time. So see, it's nothing new. This is just helping logging the progress you guys should be keeping up with anyways, and it makes the progress notes easier. And see, this is what the report looks like. Now, like I said, it depends on you guys as a team if you want to print this out with every progress note, or if you want to be doing it at the end. That's totally up to you guys, but this is what the parent's progress report would look like now. And to me, I don't know, as a parent, don't you think it's easier to understand a graph? And then as the year goes on, see, the parent, when you print this out and make this, they can see all the progress you have logged throughout the year. Instead of just saying the child's maintaining or progressing, you have actually data to back up what you're saying. And this is the summary report. So everything you log throughout the year is in there for that parent, and the graph. And that, so yeah, it will graph. We had a question that says, will it graph annual goals and objectives? It will do both. So if you progress monitor, maybe your speech therapist, OT, PT, whoever, it will literally graph all annual goals and all objectives. You just have to go in and put that data in the progress monitoring wizard and log the progress. Then when you go to print the progress report, all of that data will be in there. And like I said, we will be doing more training. I know that's a lot of information quickly at you guys. And then I think Christa will finish us out. Or here, I'll let you go back on that. I was trying to read.
Oh, that's okay. So, again, this is being recorded, and so this is beneficial for us to have too for your chat. So, we've got some, feedback in there, like more training on present levels would be very beneficial. Add that type of thing. Those are the type of, we spent time at these face-to-face trainings getting that type of feedback. I do want to mention a couple things, and we'll try to address some of these questions. That we do have the dates for Engage OK posted on our website. So, whichever one's closest, or I guess it's on the State Department's website. So look at those, save those dates, because we are going to have, in the past, we have had special education sessions, I guess, in our own little room, back to back, and what we've realized is that a lot of people are staying in our sessions all day, and it's things that we can do like this through a webinar, or we can do face-to-face trainings, and we would really like our special education teachers and directors to get out there and really work on get out there and really work on participate in some of the general education sessions and things like that. So what we're doing this year is we're going to have at each of the different locations a facilitated collaboration session. So what we're asking is that, if you're planning on going to one of these, that you do come to that session. And we got such great feedback from these face-to-face meetings of just having an opportunity to, discuss those concerns that we're all having right now. This is, provide us information on, hey, this is what I'd love to have additional support on, for districts to share when we're talking about progress monitoring tools and resources of what are you doing in your district or what are you doing, and just making those connections. So I think it'd be really beneficial if you can come to that, and I'm sure one of the topics will be around the goals and progress monitoring, since that is what we've done a lot of trainings on this year. So come, share, be prepared to share what's working well in your district, make some connections at those locations, just to go through. And again, if you didn't get on till late, the presentation is posted on the EdPlan on the state tab. I saw a question earlier that said, how do we print it out? You should be able to print it out.
You would just download it to your desktop.
So download it to your desktop and print it out. If you have any trouble with that, just get a hold of Shawna. Shawna can, she's a whiz at that kind of stuff. She can help you with that. I know we saw, and I'm sorry, there's a lot coming through, and it's hard to make sure I'm staying on top of it. But academic goals, it said, I think there was a question about does every goal need to have, does every need to have a goal? Well, most of your academic goals are going to be addressed through goals. I think EdPlan requires if it's an academic goal, right? But there may be sometimes where we have other needs like behavior or transportation and things like that may actually be addressed in other areas of the IEP. And when a student meets a goal, is a new IEP meeting required to update the goal? Yeah, but you could actually, because you're changing the goals, but it could actually, that could be a conversation that you have instead of putting all the goals on once with the parent. Hey, if they achieve the goal, we're going to call you and we're going to hold a meeting over the phone to update things. Really, if you make those changes to the IEPs, a lot of times you can do that. The parent can attend by the phone, but you can have a lot of that conversation ahead of time, just knowing that these, if we achieve these goals, these are going to be additional goals that we try.
That's a good one. That's maybe something we can do later.
So we have difficulty finding ways of monitoring progress in the general education classroom without using grades. Yes. Other than state testing and teacher-made tests, high school students are not really monitored for progress on specific skills that would be used for goals. What guidance can you give for that issue? This is a big topic, and I think a lot of what's happening here is that a couple things, okay? So again, this is talking about the difficulty, and the difficulty we have of monitoring progress in the general education classroom without using grades. So that comes back to a lot of what's happening there, and this is not just your district. A lot of districts are struggling with this. Couple things. First thing, and again, this is hard without having our full 4 hours that we've done this training in. But this was a really interesting topic. So this is something real. I think we got to get administrators on board with this. But our child count meaning the number of students in special education in Oklahoma, continually goes up every year. Okay, continuously goes up. This year it went up more. I think, I can't remember the exact percentage, but it was a greater increase than what we've ever had. One of the things I think we need to start looking at, now this is kind of just a little piece of this, is that we need to, and I'm not saying by any means take students off of IEPs. Right. I'm just saying we need to make sure that through the evaluation process, the reevaluation process, that we're really looking at, do these students still require special education services? Because if we don't really know they're in general education classrooms all day, we're not really doing anything for them, maybe they don't need to be on an IEP. I'm just saying that just to make your job easier. And I know you have, listen, this has opened up a lot of conversations. I know you have parents that's going to say, no. You're going to have to make team decisions, and if the child needs services, they need services. but we're also going to have to work with admin and teachers, general education teachers, to figure out how can we truly address specific skills. A lot of schools are doing this by providing like an intervention time or something like that, where you are truly working on true interventions and having those skills. So that is a question we don't even have time to get down to, because I think there's a lot of concerns and barriers that make that. But that question right there, and I think that was Jennifer Diggs, is that correct, who posted that? Man, that was a great summary of what we are looking at the state level and working with some other schools to figure out how we can give better guidance to that, okay? So first of all, looking at those students, what are they needing? Are they needing special education services? They may, and that's great, but let's identify what are those specific skills that we need to be addressing, and what can we do to, and I know our parents are the ones who really we know that. I mean, we get those calls. So, and I understand that, but it's important to have that support where, you know, the IEP process is important, but if the child is no longer, and for them to understand that if the child doesn't need any more, we're not providing anything, it might be. But I know that's a hard conversation. And listen, please know, I'm not telling you to take students off IEPs by any means. I'm just saying it keeps increasing every year, and this is one of the biggest challenges of these students that are in general education classrooms, especially at the secondary level. So we will be given more guidance and support on that as we're working with some other states and stuff to try to get some guidance and support. Again, this was step one, so I hope you're walking away today with what can we do. You also might want to check intensive interventions. Type that in. I can't remember the, it's intensive interventions. I think it's the Center for Intensive Interventions. Yes. It's a website, gives you a lot of information about progress monitoring tools, different interventions, gives you kind of the pros and cons, both academic and behavior. So I think it's if you type in intensive interventions, the Center for Intensive Interventions, it will come up. So check that site out also, and then just, again, step one today, and look for more guidance and training from us of continuing this conversation. I think it's been a really good conversation starter, and we've identified a lot of areas that we need to address as a state, but we're in it together, and we're part of that team, and we're going to help however we can. So Shawna's going to help me here. So, dear tired teacher, when the expectations begin to feel impossible, remember, because of you, today someone smiled, made a connection, became more confident, and felt loved. Don't give up. You have a very important job. And again, you know, Shawna and I both we're special education teachers. We know how difficult it is. We want to help, so reach out to us. The conversation doesn't have to end with this webinar. Give us a call. And let us know how we can better support you or what additional training would be beneficial. Thank you all, and have a great day.
Yes, bye. I love how they were using